Hi guys, my name is Olubumi. You're welcome to the Civic Policy Archive podcast yet again. And today I have a financial expert. Personally, I'm very bad with numbers, but then when it comes to policy, governance, and why national budgets of countries fail, I would be glad to contribute. So you're welcome today, and today I have Mr. Titus Ojo with us, and he's a budget expert. He holds a master's in public administration, and he works as a budget expert for one of the provincial governments in Canada. So you're welcome today, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I don't think I've spoken about you so well. Would you want to introduce yourself again?
Yes, thanks. And thanks for having me again. Titus Ojo, I'm an economist. I have over 10 years experience when it comes to public administration, economic analysis, economic policy. And those over 10 years experience span over Nigeria and here in Canada. So I majorly specialize in forecasting when it comes to budget process, being able to analyze the economic outlook of a particular jurisdiction or countries, right? So that's where my area of expertise lies when it comes to budget process.
Awesome. There you have it. I think I would score myself 0 for introducing him that lowly. A decade experience in economics is huge. So straight in there, I'll just throw you right into the poll.
Yeah.
Why do governments budget? Why do governments have to delineate or separate every item of the budget and project into as much as 5 years, 4 years? What's the concept behind budgeting?
So that's a good question. And before we even go into why do government budgets, let's understand some concept around what budget actually means, right? For some people who might not really understand the conceptual background or underpinning around what budget or budgeting means. Budget is a financial plan for government to see how much they would generate in terms of revenue in a particular year and how much they will spend. It's just about predicting how much we come in and how much we go out in simple terms. And this helps them to be able to allocate resources, right? So let's look at why government budget. Allocation of resources is very important.
Absolutely.
This time and age where there are a lot of things that government pays attention to, like health, like education, defense, there's an important aspect of that is being able to analyze how much you have in terms of public resources and being able to say, okay, these are priority areas. This is how much we want to allocate to education. This is how much we want to allocate to health. This is how much we want to allocate to defense and so other aspect of the economy. So that's one important aspect. Another reason why government budget is strategic planning. So, budget is just for one particular fiscal year. They plan for one particular fiscal year. Usually, most countries, their fiscal year starts from April 1st to of the current year to the March 31st of the following year. So, but that particular plan fit into long-term plan. So, for instance, government of different countries, they have their tenure. Some 4 years, some 5 years. So that period, they will have plans. What do they want to achieve by the end of that tenure? So every year's budget feed into that. So that's like a strategic plan. So if you say by end of our term, 4 years, for instance, we want to be able to build schools, construct 10 different roads or 20 roads, you allocate resources based on available public funds or public resources. If it is 2 roads that you can construct in a year that your budget can allow for, you allocate that. So that is how you can achieve those 10 roads in 5 years or 4 years, for instance. So that is strategic planning. Also, the case of transparency
Absolutely.
and accountability is also one of the reasons why government budget, because if you don't have plans of showing how you want to spend public funds and how public funds are being generated in terms of taxes or your royalties, then public will question you, citizens will question you, how are you using these funds? But when you have a budget, when you have a plan, you're able to tell, this is how much you want to spend on this is how much is coming in, this is how much deficit we're going to have in a particular year. So and then you can say, oh, this is how much you want to borrow to be able to finance this project to achieve national priorities, right? So those are the reasons why government budget.
All right, I think what you just said now brings me to my next question. You spoke about a year's budget feeding into the next year's budget. Now, in developing countries and some underdeveloped countries, especially in Africa, for example, you have governments running a year's cycle from January to December. From my own country, for example, in Nigeria, you have the budget cycle going from January to December. Now, is that why budgets fail? Is that why budgets underperform? Now, I might be asking from a layman point of view, but I understand that when you say budget feed from a year to the other, is it because some of these countries do not have the long-term budgetary plans? Is that why because we've had instances where governments, they would say budgets are underperforming. So why is that?
So there are various reasons for that, right? So there are times that it's kind of maybe common to some developing countries where they overestimate revenue. When you overestimate revenue and you expect huge revenue to come in a particular year, and it doesn't turn out to be so during that particular year, there's a high tendency that you have to borrow so much to be able to finance project, because you are planning that huge revenue is going to come in so that you'll be able to spend on programs and implement some policies. But if those projected revenue doesn't come in as expected, then that's going to be a problem to the plan. That's one. Now, other thing is also the style or the type of budgets, right? Like for instance, some countries, especially some developing countries or developing economies, they still use incremental budgeting.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so incremental budgeting is when you spend, for instance, you in a particular fiscal year, you spend maybe, let's use Nigeria for instance, because Nigeria has not fully implemented what we call zero-based budgeting.
You would have to explain that to us.
Yes, I would definitely do that. So incremental means, for instance, let's say fiscal year 2022-23, government of Nigeria spend maybe, let's say, 1 trillion naira, and then 23-24 they said, okay, expenses or expenditure is going to increase by 10%. They just increase the previous year's budget by 10%.
Yes.
And then they spend.
So
that's incremental budgeting. And that over the years has not really been effective. And that type of budgeting style might also cause budget to fail, because when you're just increasing, you don't know what will happen. You don't have contingency plans for things like that can shock the economy.
Yes.
Right, like pandemic, like those things that can just happen, like war in other countries, natural disasters. You're just planning based on, okay, let's just increase by 5%, let's increase by 10%. You're not having a good plan.
But why is that? Don't these countries have experts? Don't they have economists?
And that's one of the challenges, right? And that's why in 2016, Buhari administration proposed the zero-based budgeting. So
how is that fair?
They've not fully implemented that in ministries or agencies and all that. So that zero-based budgeting is where you just kind of like every year you just start all over again.
Oh.
You like reallocate all over again, as if nothing happened the previous year.
And but is that supposed to be so when budgets should feed into each other?
It depends, right? So it depends. It depends on if you have programs that span 4 or 5 years, right? So, but there are times that you just kind of account for that particular year and say, okay, this is, if a program or the implementation of a program would span 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
We want to know, year one, which portion is going to be implemented. Is it 30% or 40%? And that is what will be implemented that year. And then you do it like that subsequently. But not like you just spend 30 million today or 1 trillion naira today, and then the following year just increase by 5-10% and all of that. So
incremental budgeting is one of the major reasons why budgets of these countries fail.
It's part of it, and also there are other factors.
Okay.
One other factor is shock, external shock. So some of these developing countries heavily relies on resources.
Yes.
Right. They rely on royalties. So there are times that there could be natural disasters or the impact of maybe conflicts, geographical conflicts that impact their trading partners.
Okay.
The people that import their resources. So if events like that happens, it's going to hurt their budget plan, right?
Okay, I think an example of that would be some African countries that have oil deposits. Global oil prices can affect that. Am I right?
Definitely, definitely. A typical example was in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah.
You see that it impacted some commodities like wheat, like sugar, some other products like that they actually supply Africa. Africa like one of the most important places where they export their goods to, like Ukraine and Russia, right? So because Africa has over-relied on those things, so it actually impacted them, and some other factors. So yeah, those are critical factors that actually
make this budget fail.
Make budget of developing countries fail.
And thank you very much, sir, for mentioning contingency plans. When you say when developing countries, not just even in Africa, there are some countries in Asia that are developing and underdeveloped, and when they don't have contingency plans, I think this is the job of forecasters, or part of the job of budget forecasters, and I won't lie to you, until 3 years ago, I didn't know there were persons called budget forecasters. I just knew economists and budget experts. So what is the job of budget forecasters? I know you're one, that's what you do. And why don't we have budget forecasters in these countries? If there are any, why can't they forecast these things? And also, what are the tools you use in your job, for example, as a budget forecaster? That's like 3 questions.
Okay, yeah.
If you forget, I'll remind you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thanks. Those are fantastic questions. So let's look at first of all, what forecasting means, especially for viewers probably just hearing this for the first time. Forecasting just means that you want to predict what the economy will look like, or what particular variables like gross domestic product, like employment, will be in maybe 1 year time, in the next 2 years, or in the next 3 years or 5 years, as the case may be.
Yes.
So that is a process of forecasting. And how do you do that? You also rely on current trends. What is currently happening? What do you think might likely happen based on the current events? You use also historical data.
Yes.
For instance, if you want to see how the economy of a country will perform, you look at the gross domestic product. You can look at how it has performed over the years, and then look at what is happening in the economy right now, and that will give you an insight of what could happen in the next 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. So that's forecasting. So when you talk about some of these developing countries, why are they not forecasting some of those things? So there's a certain aspect of forecasting that some developing countries might not pay attention to, and one of them is scenario based, right?
Yes.
So you don't just assume that everything will be fine. There are some countries that
You're saying they're too
right?
optimistic.
Yeah, some might be overly optimistic, and that's maybe one of the challenges that
Budget forecasters are supposed to be pessimistic or
not
realistic.
really realistic and being objective, right? So
objectivity.
and that also plays a critical role in terms of how being objective and not being under political influence, for instance, right, in those kind of part of the world, right? So scenario based means that you are creating different scenarios, and that's another one of the tools that you, as a forecaster, you use. You can look at, for instance, let's say we want to forecast how Nigerian economy will perform in 2026, for instance. We want to look at scenario A, for instance. We assume that there will not be war, there
Yes.
will not be problems in certain countries that Nigeria exports its oil to. There will not be such things, right? Then inflation will probably have lowered maybe within maybe 20%, because right now it's more than 30%. So you assume that, right? Then you create another scenario. Say, okay, for instance, let's assume that there will be certain events that will happen in 2026 that will affect the Nigerian economy. Let's assume the major trading partner will have issues, which will affect oil export in Nigeria. Let's assume that inflation will still remain the same, maybe around 30%. Let's assume that interest rates will also not go down, will still be at that high level in 2026. So you create those different scenarios. Okay, let's say there will be maybe disaster or something, or that kind of event that will happen. You create another scenario. Then you run your forecast based on those parameters that you have set.
Awesome.
Then you can be able to inform policy or decision makers saying, okay, this is what we assume for scenario A, scenario B, scenario C. So in that case, they will be able to plan. They'll be able to plan ahead that, okay, if this happens, this is what we'll do.
This is the response. This is the economic response.
If scenario A happens, this is how we respond to it. So that will help them to prepare for such event.
Oh, I think this is quite informative. I'm learning myself from this. Coming from that, are you saying that political interference disturbs or affects or contradicts the works of budget forecasters?
Yeah, it does happen, especially in Africa or developing countries that probably maybe it's at the level of political sphere, they want to implement some things. They want certain things to go certain ways, right? Yes. So they might propose some things to maybe a certain ministry, a certain ministry that is in charge of the forecast, right? Saying, oh, we want to see something like this. We want to see something like this. But this now depends on those senior leadership in those areas, in those ministries, to say, okay, we have to be objective, because our role as forecasters or civil service is to provide you with objectivity, right? So to say it the way it should be without any influence, right? So that's how you can probably mitigate that, because also they are not the expert here.
Mm-hmm.
You are the expert. You are providing advisory services to them, right? So you need to let them understand that there's also a danger in not being objective, right? Because if you don't create those, for instance, you don't create those scenarios and certain things happen, you get questioned.
Absolutely.
Like, why didn't you advise us
Foresee
on this?
this,
Why do
yes.
you foresee this, right? So that's the reason why objectivity is very important.
Oh, that objectivity. I think for budding forecasters, they would have to learn objectivity, and this is good that you're mentioning it now. One of the major questions I tend to ask every person that I interview or I speak with on the podcast is artificial intelligence. For example, there's this cry that AI is going to disrupt everything in the world as we know it. What artificial intelligence tools do you use in your work as a forecaster, as an economist, as a financial person? And do you think that artificial intelligence is going to disrupt your field in unknown ways? That's the second question. The third one would be, how can developing countries all over the world or underdeveloped countries leverage AI to make their budgets work?
Oh, that's very interesting. That's an interesting question. So, with the use of AI, right? So when it comes to government usually take a very conscious approach
Absolutely.
in adopting mainstream AI, because AI has been in existence. Don't get me wrong, because we have the likes of Siri,
Oh,
the
yeah.
likes of those are here. So, but like mainstream now, it becomes a mainstream thing in 2022, 23, where you have the ChatGPT and all that, and all other stuff started popping out. So there are some tools that definitely you are working with that helps you in a way to automate process and all that. So, for instance, there are data analysis tool that kind of helps to automate process. When you already provide the tools, you feed in the data and all that, it can automate process for you. There are tools like that. For instance, if you automate your Power BI, there's this intelligence tool, business intelligence tool. Those are where you can analyze data. Those kind of tools help you to analyze data in real time. If once they are updated in the main source, for instance, if it's linked to, let's say, StatCan database, and StatCan updated their database, Power BI, you can automate Power BI in a way that it extract those data from the database and help you to visualize those data you want to see, because you have already automated that, right? That's also part of artificial intelligence, because you can automate processes. So, but in terms of the mainstream, adopting mainstream artificial intelligence, most governments have not fully adopt all of that, in terms of maybe how you can incorporate like Microsoft Copilot in using it to work in the office or in the public service. Those have not been fully adopted, and I'm not sure that they really adopted those tools in developing countries as well, right? So, but those tools can be very effective in terms of automating repetitive processes, can increase turnaround time. And going to your questions around if it's going to replace people,
Yes. Especially economists.
that's a tough one. I don't think so. I think it's going to help people, but definitely it will only replace people that probably will not embrace artificial intelligence. If you are not the type that wants to embrace artificial intelligence, know how to use it in your work, know how to make things work with artificial intelligence, make the process or be very efficient and effective, then artificial intelligence can displace such people. So it's all about you as a person, as an individual, embrace it. Find out how you can use it in your work, how it can help you to deliver, how it can make you more efficient. So with that, I don't think it's gonna just replace people with the knowledge. But if you're not the type that's gonna embrace it, then probably it might displace such people.
Thank you so very much. That explains it comprehensively. And that takes me to the next question about, you know, in developed worlds like the one we're currently speaking from,
Yeah.
like Canada, taxation is a huge revenue source. Part of, I think, the first two, the first major revenue source, or the first two major revenue source is taxation. And in developing countries or underdeveloped countries, it's not the same.
Yeah.
How can they maximize this? How can, and we have countries, especially in West Africa now, increasing taxes. Is that the answer to making budgets work or getting the country to be richer? And how can they maximize this? How can they widen their tax bracket?
So, and that's a good point that you just mentioned, right? So, that's one of the points that I first of all think of, widening or broadening their taxes, right? Tax base. One of the problems I can easily identify in developing countries is that they have not been really effective in tax collection. So, and one of the issues is the informal sector.
Yes.
The informal sector is huge.
Is it the gig economy or what?
No, it's okay. Let me give you an example. You're very familiar with all this. In Nigeria, for instance, you know Eko, Idumota.
Yes.
That aspect, those are informal sector.
But in Eko Idumota, for example, and for viewers that do not know Eko Idumota is Lagos is also called Eko. So Lagos is the commercial nerve center of Nigeria, and Nigeria is the largest black nation in the world. So you can imagine how Eko Idumota is like the central hub for informal trades. And informal trading is everything you want in Lagos.
Yeah.
You can go there, you get it. Yeah, you can continue.
So that's a typical example of.
But the state government tries to tax them.
It has not been effective.
How can they do that better?
It has not. And that's where AI technology comes into play.
And they have the same market like that in Ghana. I think it's called Katamanto Market. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. How can they tap into this?
So they can leverage technology. They can leverage AI, and one of these things is that it's not like those participants in that sector wants to evade taxes or don't want to pay taxes. But when the process is not seamless, when the process is not easy for them to be able to understand and pay their taxes, it becomes a problem, right? If they can government can leverage technology to be able to effectively help those people, those participants in that sector to be able to pay their taxes seamlessly, then they'll collect more taxes from there. And then there are other aspects of e-commerce. There are other gig economy, so-called freelancers that works for companies in countries like the US, Canada, Australia.
How can you tax freelancers? How would you tax them?
That is the thing, right? So government need to really develop capacity to be able to do that. They also need to learn from other developed countries. There are countries that are doing that right now. They are being able to tax people in that industry. So try to look at how some nations have started to do that. And then you can see how it's maybe unique to your own country as a developing country.
Yes.
Then adopt that, tweak it to fit your own country, to your own system or how it relates to you, and then you'll be able to collect more taxes. There's a lot of e-commerce. There are a lot of people who are freelancers working, getting paid like $3,000, $4,000 monthly in Nigeria.
Yeah.
But some of them might not be paying taxes. So that is not just about increasing tax rate now. It's all about looking for those loopholes that people are exploiting or using deliberately or non-deliberately, and be able to collect taxes and leverage technology and AI. And another point here is adopting progressive tax system.
Progressive tax system. What is that?
So that is when you tax people that earn more. you tax the richest more
As you as
compared to
much
the
as you
poor,
earn, you
right?
pay. Yeah.
So that is another way that that's another system that government in developing countries can definitely earn or increase their revenue without necessarily increasing tax rate, broad-based tax rate, right? So those are avenues, those are ways that government can actually use effectively to increase their revenue.
Oh, that's insightful, sir. Thank you so very much. So one last question before I go, right? Um, you've been in this business of forecasting and budgeting and economics writings and all of that for over 10 years. Now, if you were to recommend a budgeting system for a country that is developing or underdeveloped, what would it be?
I'll probably recommend a performance-based budgeting system. So this kind of tied to the performance of government programs. So it's about, have you achieved the outcomes of these programs, right? Rather than just you want, like as mentioned earlier, incremental budgeting that some nations might still be using, not necessarily effective. But performance based means that the budget is tied to the performance of those programs. So it means that if they don't perform, there will not be more funding to those programs, right? To implement those policies. There have to be outcomes that meets national priorities to be able to spend more money into those programs rather than just spend more money for spending more money's sake. So, and that's what some developing countries have issues. They just want to have those elephant projects,
Yes.
and spend more money, and then they don't see the outcomes of that, right? Just because of the kind of system of budget that they are adopting. But performance basis ties to the performance of programs and policies.
Awesome. And on the note of performance-based budgeting, I want to thank you guys for staying with us till the end of this podcast. And enjoying you. If you've loved and learned from what our esteemed guests here have said, you should give us a like or try to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so very much. Till I see you again. It's been the Civic Policy Podcast. Bye.